I definitely see the criticism that people have of Elon not having as much of a focus on Tesla um, over, since he really took over X. And it seems like now that he is, entering into Tesla wartime CEO mode, that we're probably getting a lot more focus in Tesla from Elon than we've had for a while. Um, but it's going to be, some of the same people that have been complaining about his lack of focus are now going to complain about the decisions that he makes now that he is 100% focused on Tesla almost. So
why are you choosing that strategy? It's so crazy.
Yeah. Why don't you just be like normal CEOs and do normal CEO things? We need more advertising. We need more this. We need more that.
It is fascinating. Like that's an interesting point you make, is like, like Tesla is Tesla because of how weird the whole thing is run. Weird meaning that it's very unorthodox and different from every other large scale company. It's much more like, I feel like if people had more exposure to startups and more entrepreneurial type environments, and they were familiar with the kind of like decisions that you would have to make at smaller sizes, let's say, because of where you are as a company and how much risk you want to take because you feel like this is a do or die moment, right? I feel like people, if they view it through that lens, Tesla seems extremely normal. It's just the actions and strategic decisions are being done at a scale that's 100 times bigger, with 1,000 times the scale, with 1,000,000 times the visibility. And so it seems crazy to a lot of people, I feel like, but it's not. It's just that we have a kind of a lunatic that's willing to take those risks, but if he makes the right ones, they pay off.
He's always been.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing for people who've been deeply
to his benefit and detriment, right?
Yeah. Yes. Both. And so that's why, I think one of the things that I put out on Twitter is that I expect the near term to be turbulent, because I don't expect people to understand what Elon's doing. I don't expect him to coddle investors or employees either. Like, he is in that we're going to be hard and we're going to, like, this is the way it is, my way or the highway. That's part of wartime CEO mode. And so, yeah, I think that, there can be a lot of confusion. There's going to be a lot of FUD. It's going to be pretty crazy roller coaster, I think, potentially from here. And, maybe I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong on that. I would love for there to be someone inside the company who steps up and really is empowered to tell the story and help people to understand exactly why all the decisions are being made that are being made and all these things. I just don't think that I don't think that's very likely. But on the other side of this, I know that we are going to be in a position to, like, revolutionize the business model of transport and then profit. Like, all the things that we're building right now are necessary foundation to create the type of company the world has never seen before.
The fascinating thing about that, though, is like that's happened so many times already with the company. This is like multiple times the founding of the company with an electric vehicle in the first place. Then you have a charging network. Then you have a more mass market vehicle that's sold at a profit. Then it's doing one that is 10x the volume of that initial one. Then it's expanding to other markets. Now it's going down the path of autonomy and going down the path of the bot and stuff, right? It's just
4680 batteries and the original Gigafactory in Nevada. Like, all of these things were nuts. The Dojo chips, and like, that's part of, I think people are going to look at something like the 4680 and be like, well, that hasn't gone as fantastically well as we hoped it would have. And that's because it's a really hard problem. I think we're actually in a really good place with the ramp of the 4680 cells right now. we don't have as much data on that as I'd like to have, but that seems like it's in a good place. But even, even if not, the thing is you got to keep making those wild shots on goal. And even if they don't always pan out, the fact that a company of this size and scale is willing to continue to swing for the fences like that is a positive thing. Like, you want your CEO who has a history of creating impossible things, even if they are late, to keep trying to create impossible things.
But I do think, because I'm trying to get myself in the head of like folks that are viewing this story and are very frustrated, because I think if you're somebody who has been viewing Tesla through the lens of not the non-AI story or the non-self-driving story, the non-autonomy story, the non-bot story, the last couple years, or let's say the last 12 months to 18 months, if you're not assigning any value, or you feel like that's not a thing that's going to happen, then I could see how somebody's looking at Tesla today. They're like, this is terrible, right? Because you have margin degradation. You have a declining year-over-year sales on a quarterly basis. You have signals where the car market is soft across many different regions, which is going to impact Tesla's ability to get cars out. You have the whole X thing, the Twitter and X thing that's going on, that's going to give you a lot of like, hey, look at this business. This business is like falling apart, let's say, subjectively, not, and some people may say objectively based on the quarterly earnings reports. But your attention is here. What the hell is happening, right? But I think now I got in my head wrapped around that, is that I think when folks view that story, they view it through a different lens than, say, maybe you and I do, where it's like perhaps the growth trajectory of the business is underpinned by metal moved and not by the software that's developed through artificial intelligence. And for people, I think that maybe have been following the story for a while, the underpinnings of that story has been there since 2016, really, 2017, since the release of Navigator on Autopilot. It was just so early on, and it was early stages that nobody really, I think very, 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 very few people actually thought that was even going to be a thing long term, because Tesla was on its growth trajectory for the electric vehicle business. They were trying to get recognized for being a profitable electric vehicle maker, but at the same time they were working on this sort of AI breakthrough. And that's around the time that that Elon was funding OpenAI, which is some of the underpinnings of the sort of, using neural nets to power a full self-driving stack that they have on the car. During that time, Elon's like making moves to get the company up to that level, but the lens hasn't been shifted. The lens of today is very much the lens of 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, so on and so forth. And so I think for it to change, for that lens to change, there has to be proof. There has to be proof that Tesla not only has a breakthrough or has the technology to revolutionize transportation again, but instead of using electric vehicles, it's using autonomy. There has to be proof in the P&L and the product in the profit and loss sheet that says, look at this line, automation, FSD, whatever line item it is. Look at this number, and look at how much bigger this number is versus the previous number from last quarter, and look at how much bigger this number is getting to the relation to the other business, and then look at how much margin there is in this number. And what's crazy about this conversation too is this is different from robotaxi, in my opinion.
This is a floor on the value of Tesla as a software-enabled business without baking in robotaxis.
I agree, and I think that's where this is getting conflated. In a lot of discussions that I see online, it feels like there's like a fog. There's a fog of war going on right now as it relates to Tesla, like literally, because of what Tesla has achieved with their ADAS system and their current fleet, what their aspirations are long term with their current fleet, and what robotaxi is. Like people are still confused by what robotaxi is, because some people are under the assumption that the current fleet will not be able to do level 4, and some are. And then there's this whole Reuters thing about canceling the Model 2, the compact car, which, okay, let me ask you this question. Okay, do you think Tesla has canceled this compact car?
I don't.
Right. Why?
I believe that there is at least some production for the consumer vehicle that has steering wheel and pedals that was canceled. I don't know how large of a percentage. Like, if you read Walter Isaacson's biography, they were obviously preparing to have both fully autonomous, no steering wheel, no pedals vehicles built on the same lines with most of the same parts as ones with steering wheel and pedals that were going to be sold to consumers. If you're going to bring a product, that portfolio of products to the market, you have to sequence them. Some of them have to come before others. Some of them are going to be produced in some warehouses or manufacturing plants, and others are not. Like, you have to cover the supply chain for how do each and every one of those products get distributed, where do they get produced, who are all your suppliers, all that stuff. And if you make any decisions on the fly and you decide, hey, we thought we were going to make 50% robo-taxis and 50% consumer cars this year, and now we're actually saying, you know what, instead of that, we're going to do 65 or 70% robo-taxis and 30 or 35% consumer cars. Well, you just started canceling orders, and you didn't have one supplier for all the parts for all those things. You probably just told several suppliers, we're not going to be ordering anything from you, and those are going to be your lower tier suppliers. I could be wrong. And they could be saying, no, we're just going to go fully 100% robo-taxi. If they are doing that, I don't know. I think that Elon sees data that we don't see that makes that the smart decision for the business, and I trust him with that long term. But then on the flip side, I can also come up with a justification that says, even if I'm planning to come out with consumer cars, I'm going to tell the market we're starting with robo-taxis, because that deflects attention away from this consumer car, and it prevents me from osborning not only current sales of 3Y, SX, and Cybertruck, but it gives me some cover to start producing some vehicle. Like, when we'll just say, in a hypothetical future in which Tesla is producing millions and millions of $25,000 compact cars that consumers can buy, the demand for that product is going to be so insane. The wait times will be absolutely nuts. And so why would you not start producing these other robo-taxi versions and say, these are all we're going to be making, get your production volumes built up, and then all of a sudden switch over and start also producing your consumer vehicles once you've got your production capacity built up to much, much, much higher levels. And then you just, say, oh, 2 weeks from now, we're going to be beginning deliveries of the consumer vehicle. This is the price. And if you want to order it, go get on the website. That's what you would do. And so, I don't know how to interpret all of the signs that we're seeing with any sort of confidence to know exactly, Tesla's going to keep all of those cards close to the vest. And what we're going to see from the outside is going to look the same regardless of what their decision is. So, Fred can speculate all he wants. Reuters can speculate all they want. I'm going to speculate. I know that I am speculating a lot. But that's all that we can do from the position that we have outside of the company, not having the full set of information that management is looking at.
I view everything with a robotaxi through a lens that is, Tesla will deflect their ownership of actually operating a fleet to suppliers, to providers. I don't think Tesla is going to focus too much on running their own fleet. And I know like a lot of, I think, and this is, I think where the conversation sort of like gets stuck, right? Because I could be wrong there, but if I'm viewing it through that lens, like why would Tesla not run their own fleet, and why would Tesla choose to sell robotaxis to fleet providers and create an ecosystem for this transportation, whatever you want to call it, transportation ecosystem, instead of taking on the responsibility? Number one, they don't have to deal with the customer endpoint. They just, like I've talked about it multiple times on this channel, if it's more like a Boeing, Airbus type solution where you make the plane and you sell it to Delta, United, whoever else, and they figure out what they want to do with the interior. Boeing and Airbus don't deal with the customer. They just make the product for these companies, these providers, these airline providers to sell their services to people that choose to go with their airline, right? So like Orbitz is like, I would think of it as like the Tesla network turns into Orbitz. Like, you know, when you try to book a flight or whatever. Expedia, Trivago. This video is not sponsored by any of these people, by the way. So, so you go
unless
on
they
one
would
of these.
like to, in which case we're totally open to it.
Hit me up, send me a DM. Let's do it. But Orbitz and these guys, so they put all these airlines on there, right? And then you go on that website and you choose which one you want depending on what you're looking for. Are you looking for first class service? Are you looking for lowest cost per mile? Are you looking for shortest time? So on and so forth. This is what robotaxi will be in a way. And robotaxi is going to be the shell. This is how I'm viewing it, the shell. And then the service, like the Orbitz equivalent, will be the Tesla app. And then people can dump their solutions on there using the shell. And whatever solutions they come up with, they set the price. They set the value proposition. You know, this one's got a mini bar. This one's got a bed. This one has a surface for you to work on, right? Whatever. This one has 1,000 TVs and the best sound system you'll ever hear in your life. Whatever the solution is that you're trying to work for. You put that on the thing, and then people can book through the Tesla app. But then if Tesla does that, Tesla doesn't have to worry about cleaning up. Tesla doesn't have to worry about the customer. Tesla doesn't have to worry about outfitting the interior. Tesla basically puts the liability of making sure that the car is safe in the interior on the provider instead of themselves. They have to ensure, right? Tesla just ensures that they're selling the product to the company in that meets the regulations that are set forth by whatever jurisdiction or place that they're selling it to, right? Just like how Uber today, Uber doesn't take on the responsibility of the car itself. They provide a service, and then Ford, GM, Chevy, Toyota, Honda, they sell the product for fleet providers, i.e. drivers, to buy their solution and then put it on the network, and then Uber profits, takes a cut from that thing, right? And then there was a whole thing about how they have to make drivers 1099B and whatever, or 1099s and that whole thing, right? Not to mention that Uber had to go through a whole thing with the medallion stuff in NYC. Some cities were blocking them from even operating because they were so disruptive to, you know, so like robotaxi is that. Like robotaxi is the ecosystem, I think. Again, pure speculation, I think. And so when I view it through that lens, that solution is vastly different from what Tesla is doing with FSD on their current vehicles. But the question arises is like, okay, are people going to be able to add their current cars to that fleet as well? And so like you have a robotaxi solution that's maybe more customized, and then you have Model 3s, Model Ys, Model S's, Model X's, Cybertrucks potentially that are a lot more traditional, where it's like the 2x3 setup, where it's like an Uber, much more akin to Uber, but there's just no driver in there. So you open up an additional seat potentially, or whatever it may be, and it's like you're very limited by what you can offer. And does those solutions do they turn into like the lowest cost per mile solution for, you know, on the fleet or whatever? Like, and this is where like the whole conversation gets confusing, because we don't have a lot of clarity. And then you have the compact car on top of that, which is built in the same platform as the robotaxi, the Gen 3 platform. You know, there's a lot of moving pieces, but I think it being cloudy benefits Tesla in the long term for that compact car, to your point, because people have no idea what's going to happen, right? So then their current fleet of cars, the Model 3, the Model S, the Model Y, do not get impacted. there's no chance of Osborning, which for those that are not familiar is basically when a future product that you haven't released yet but you've announced takes sales from your current lineup, which makes you lose money, which is, I think, kind of what might happen with Rivian with their R2 unveil and their R2S and their R3 or whatever. So they have to be careful there, but they do have a pickup and a large SUV, so hopefully they don't run through that. But that's just a brain dump of where my head is at. That's why this whole conversation is so fascinating, because there's so many variables that are up in the air that we may get a little bit of clarity on, probably not on the quarterly earnings report next week. But I think on August 8th, when the Robotaxi is going to be unveiled, we'll get all the clarity we need. But maybe not, because this compact car, I agree with you, is not, I would be shocked. I would be absolutely shocked if they cancel this thing outright, because Tesla's biggest advantage by far is scale and profitability at scale that nobody else has when it comes to an electric vehicle platform, which dollar per dollar gives you the best value proposition of any transportation system. And that cannot be argued.
Yes. And manufacturing at scale, like, we need lots and lots of these vehicles on the road to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. And even if a consumer vehicle doesn't have, isn't a quote unquote robo-taxi, the fact that it is a platform for continued sales of FSD as a service, like, that's another revenue driver. I think that you're right. This is my speculation, that the thing that Elon took issue with in the Reuters article was the use of the word canceled. I think it is reprioritized, rescheduled, personally. We'll see how that turns out. But then I did want to comment on, I agree with all of your logic for why Tesla does not want to operate this fleet for themselves. But I would add to it what I think is an even more important reason is that if you're providing an economic platform for other people to make money, and you're, creating opportunities for other people, that makes you much less likely to become the target of discriminatory legislation and, antitrust lawsuits and all that stuff. Like, Tesla does not want to be the only person, like, that they're disrupting all of transportation and they're the only ones making all the profit. Like, they're never going to make that move. It's not in their DNA. It's not the way that Elon operates. He's been licensing, like, we're opening up the supercharger network. We're open to licensing FSD as a product for other auto manufacturers. All of these things signal that they want to work with as many other people in the industry as possible, as long as they can keep up with Tesla and they don't slow Tesla down. So to me, it's blindingly obvious that yes, they will do the same approach for robo-taxis. I would not be surprised, though, if they do operate some, like, pilot fleets fully in-house, just to have that feedback loop and the vertical integration that comes from having that feedback loop, just to improve the quality of the app and the services and all that stuff. And then, I have no idea how the Tesla network is going to operate and whether or not these legacy fleet vehicles are going to be able to participate in that or not. I think that the way that I handicap it in my mind is that there's probably going to be some owners in some cities who are able to participate at some level for at least a short period of time. I don't think that over the long term, most Tesla owners in most places will be able to earn significant amount of. I think that part is unlikely. I would love to be wrong, because I think the economics of the purpose-built, like, if you get to 2030, 2035, almost every Tesla that was made is built on this new platform, and this new platform outcompetes the previous versions of the fleet in terms of economics, and they take the lion's share of the profit.
Yeah, but I think the current solution will be depreciated so much that there is going to be a value proposition for it, especially if you compare it to the rest of, like, the transportation market. I still feel like assuming that the current fleet of 3Ys and whatever can indeed drive themselves and they can operate as level 4, which is basically, like a Waymo essentially, then I think there's still so much value to that because such a gigantic percentage of the fleet is the dollar per mile is still going to be so high because they're gas cars, and they need gas and the driver. So the value prop, I agree with you that over time, this is like 2040, 2045 or so on. But by then, who knows what Tesla's going to be making, Will Tesla shift all their production over to robotaxi by 2035? And this is where like the fundamental shift and the change of what it means to have a transportation system in the age of autonomy gets completely upended. It just breaks. It's like literally BlackBerry to iPhone. It's exactly the same thing, like literally exactly the same thing. When you go from BlackBerry to iPhone, the value proposition of what it means to have a thing in your pocket is broken. Because the BlackBerry is purely limited by screen size and compute power and basically what you can offer from a form factor perspective to a thing that changes everything.
A non-programmable user interface and terrible software.
Yeah. And limited real estate on the screen.
And people need to remember that it took BlackBerry a long time to stop selling. Like the most units that BlackBerry ever sold were in the first couple of years after the introduction of the iPhone. And so there was all kinds of confusion about, is BlackBerry a growing company? Do they have a bright future? They're selling more units than they've ever sold. And it's like, if you look at the underlying trends, you realize that this is a zombie of a company. And, the legacy automotive industry is a zombie of an industry today. We don't know how long it's going to take for all of them to die, and which ones of them get recombined into novel and profitable ways for, somebody. But that industry as it exists today is dead.
Boy, will you get a lot of shit if you say that in certain circles. How dare you say that? Toyota's bigger than ever, Hans. They're more profitable than ever because they sell hybrids. Come on, Hans. And they have $200 billion of debt, or however much they have in debt, but it is what it is.
I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Toyota kind of comes out okay in this. If they keep dragging their feet long enough and stockpile enough cash, I think they might be in a position to bat cleanup and to actually come out okay in the long term. So that's where I said, like the industry as a whole is dead. That doesn't mean that individual players can't navigate the turbulence between here and there well and end up doing just fine.
The industry of gas cars where people are required to drive them.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but they could shift over time. Yeah, it's and what's even more wild about the self-driving piece is that the self-driving piece only works if it's electric too. It's almost like you're double moded, right? You can't have a self-driving gas car. The response time is going to be too slow because you have lag in the propulsion system, and then idling is going to be terrible. The cost per mile equation is very different because now you have to work with an entire system of gas, fuel providers to figure out how to do that autonomously. So yeah, you could have just a guy that puts the gas in the thing, but if you have a electric vehicle alternative that does the same exact thing at a much lower cost per mile, economically speaking, it becomes worthless essentially. So like that equation breaks as well. So it's like you're double motored in a way. So it's like the players that can make those electric vehicles, self-driving electric transportation units, are the ones that are ahead of the game versus those that can't.
And once again, it's that same thing of over time, like over a specified period of years. Yes, that's true. It like I don't know what it's going to look like in between. I think it's very likely that we will see some amount of autonomous gasoline powered vehicles at some level. I don't know if they'll be level 5, but software enabled,
like level 3
from like potentially. Like I think that there's going to be
Mercedes
automakers who are they're trying to exactly. Nvidia
if you're going 45 miles an hour in traffic in a certain highway.
Nvidia's not going to care if you produce an EV or an ICE vehicle, and if they're able to provide a software that is high enough quality that it provides some function, it's not going to be, in my opinion, as good as Tesla software. I think Tesla software is significantly ahead and accelerating, but I think that there is a business model that is viable for a short period of time that does include the combination of the gas powertrain and some autonomous driving technology.
It's the pregnant pause. It's the pregnant pause, like where it's.
This is what it feels like when shit hits the fan.
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does. And I think that just watching the conversation online, and when I read about the frustration, and let's say like the people that are doubting this approach, and it's just, I think a lot of it is built on assumptions that are fed by news outlets that are portraying information that's not necessarily accurate during a time where the company is ready to execute on a strategy that they've been laying out for the last 8 years. Go ahead. You're laughing. What are you laughing about?
I'm laughing for just thinking about people that keep showing up in my X replies that are, calling me this crazy cultish person, and like their talking points are, yes, definitely. I am in the beard cult. Their talking points are literally mainstream media talking points. Like they have been programmed. They're calling me a cult member or a cult leader or whatever, a cultist. And I would agree. Like I am definitely. We've had this conversation. We're all in a cult. You just don't know which cult you're in because that's the cult you're in.
We're an overlapping series of cults.
Yes. It's cults all the way down. So, I don't disagree that I'm in a cult, but it just makes me chuckle because they have, the person who's telling me that I'm in a cult thinks that they're not in a cult when they're in like the biggest cult that there is. I'm like, like you are a crazy person. At least I understand my particular flavor of crazy. The fact that you don't understand yours makes me, nervous for you in your future.
And I think the part that what's interesting about the whole conversation is like, I think the cult aspect of it comes from realizing that there is a technology out there that is going to transform the world as we know it, and there's a player that is solving for that. And it just so happens that for us to be able to move forward towards that technology, you kind of need a little bit of a person that's going to be uniquely viewed by some of the public. That's going to cause a certain type of emotion, and people are going to be like, "Oh my God, look at this crazy person! Look at the fandom the cult he has surrounded himself with that are so like embedded in this thing, right?" But I think what that side sometimes miss is that I think a giant majority of that cult, or whatever you want to call it, are much more fascinated by the technological breakthroughs than the person itself. It's just so happens that the person itself, and Elon in this case, has such a maniacal sense of driving that move forward that inspires a lot of people, but somehow that's viewed as a negative, that's a bad thing that's happening. Okay, fine. People can think that however long they want, and history will work out the way it's going to work out in the future. And those that are watching this, that are smart enough that they don't have a YouTube channel commentating about it and getting flamed left and right when, there are periods for this technology to come to fruition, they won't have to bear the brunt of that commentary, and that's it. And then, they're smart enough to just watch this whole thing play out and just read the comments, instead of like, as an outsider, be like, oh, this is fun, But I think in the end, the most interesting thing about this whole thing for me is that I think there are people out there that legitimately think that this will not come to fruition. That self-driving technology is an unsolvable thing, or it's something that's not going to be adopted by the masses, or even electric vehicles, let's say. Even electric vehicles where, we've seen the goalposts move 1,000 times since the first, Tesla Roadster was unveiled, that those goalposts are now starting to move for the autonomy piece. We're at the beginning stages of those goalposts starting to move. We're moving from this is the most impossible problem ever to now that FSD V12 has come out, and it's, I think, shown that, I think for the people that were maybe slightly skeptical, perhaps now they're like, yeah, but it's never going to get there. Yeah, but they're not going to approve it. Yeah, but it's not going to be. Yeah, exactly. Right. So like now we're starting to see those goals. It's just such a fascinating thing. And, the question becomes, okay, so there's two questions. Do you think self-driving technology will happen? Yes or no? So depending where you are in that thing, then, if it's yes, great. If it's no, you're just completely out of the equation. And then when you're, say, commentating on this not coming to fruition, you're coming from that lens. But let's say self-driving technology is possible. Yes. Okay. Will Tesla be the one or one of the players that solves for it? Yes or no? Right. Then depending on that, you're going to have a subset of the equation that's going to hate on Tesla, but they're going to be bullish on the self-driving technology. And that's where the conversation becomes, okay, who has the scalable solution? Who has the cheapest cost per mile? Who has the right software so that it's scalable in areas that it can learn without the need of 1,000 people and super custom built cars and so on and so forth. But if you agree that self-driving technology is solvable, right, then you, I think by default, are also accepting that the entire equation of what it means to move around gets completely upended. It just changes entirely. And so you have a brand new TAM and brand new total addressable market that's probably going to be significantly bigger than it is now, because you're removing so many barriers of entry to play in that game, right? You're removing the cost barrier because the cost per mile comes down dramatically. And then you're also removing the the accessibility. And as other parts of the world become richer and richer, then you also start getting this solution in more and more parts of the world. So it significantly increases the total addressable market of this thing. And so if a player becomes active in that TAM starting now, then you have a giant, growth curve ahead of you that has never existed before. And then that same technology will underpin human or robots potentially, so on and so forth, right?
Which we haven't even talked about today. Like everything we've talked about is a huge new phase of growth for the company that doesn't even begin to address the biggest growth driver that Tesla is interested in. And I think, for those poor people who I feel for, that were invested in Tesla because of the EV only story, and they invested only because they believe in climate change and they believe that EVs are the way that we address climate change, and they are hopeful. I'm thinking about someone like Lee, Tesla economist, who, the 4680 progress is slower than anticipated. Their 20 million vehicles in 2030 target looks like it's completely unreachable. And they're not willing to assign any value to these artificial intelligence areas of the business. Unfortunately, Elon has been telling these people for years, this is a fundamental part of the growth of the business. And it's not optional for you to understand or not understand if you want to stay invested in the name. You don't have autonomy day and AI day and these announcements about Optimus, and then saying that, on August 8th, we're launching our robotaxi. Like those announcements, if you don't understand them and they increasingly become the focus of the company, you don't understand what the business is doing. And how do you re-underwrite your investment thesis if you don't understand the thing that is one of the most important components of where Elon is moving the direction of Tesla over time? And that's why I've spent a lot of time trying to understand artificial intelligence. I'm not a software programmer. I don't understand these things as a person who's a practitioner of machine learning. And so I've had to do a lot of legwork, a lot of hours of research to try and get myself to the point where I feel comfortable understanding the technology and where I think it's going on my own, and different players in the space. But we also, all of that said, I think that all of those things are important. But even for someone who's not willing to do the work that we've done, how do you look at something like ChatGPT and put ourselves in the mind of someone who lived in 2021 and thinking about, oh, the world is never, we're never going to have a computer that can pass the Turing test. It's decades away, hundreds of years possibly, maybe not even possible. And then ChatGPT comes along and redefines everything. How do you look at a proof case like that and think it's impossible for that technology to get ported from the purely software space and digital and screens and phones and not be able to interact with things in the real world? That's the bet that someone who thinks that autonomy is not possible is making. They're saying that ChatGPT is impossible to port to the real world. And I just fundamentally think that's stupid.
Well, I don't know if they're saying it's impossible. I think what they're saying, to kind of play like the that side a little bit, is like, I think they're saying that they need to see proof that it's actually achievable and that it's profitable before they're willing to assign any value to it.
What do you call free trials and price reductions and massive take rate increases?
That I mean, it goes to my comment of like, it needs to show up on the P&L. It needs to show up on the P&L, I think, for these people to assign value to it. Because I think the viewpoint is, with Tesla in the past, you've been able to take the profit they're making on Model S and X, or Model S when it started. You could see that they have a positive gross profit with a game-changing product, and all they need is scale for the operational leverage to kick in, and then you have a multi-$100 billion business in the making as they ramp up to multi-million units per year, right? So, but it was in the P&L. It like showed up on the P&L, and then you could look at, okay, gross profit, net income, and then as gross profit goes up, R&D.
Remember what
and
happened
OpEx.
After that? It did, like, we got those brief periods of profitability, and then they invested aggressively again, and then it was negative margins for a long time. Like, that was a blip of hope that did show up. Like, it was some concrete proof, but then it went away, and then all the FUD came back. And I feel like that's where we're basically at right now. I think that free trials and reduced prices on subscription services, that's like the Model S of software revenues for Tesla. Like, it only gets bigger and better from here.
Yeah, but I mean, my bull thesis obviously says and that's why I'm invested in the name, is because, I mean, you and I are speaking the same language. I'm just like trying to get myself in the position of like, this is how somebody would view it from a standpoint of, I'm not just going to take, the framing would be, set aside the research, set aside the trends, set aside the hands-on experience and everything like that, and talking to experts and, testing your thesis and viewing the competition and so on and so forth. Put that aside, it's still not on the P&L. I really think it just comes down to that. It's like, it's not on the P&L, so I can't do math on it. And I completely understand why somebody would take that viewpoint, because there is an unwillingness to take a risk on the being too ahead of the game and say it doesn't work, then you're screwed, right? And that's the viewpoint that they will take, in my opinion.
I personally love that the vast majority of market participants take that position, because it offers me the opportunity, as someone who thinks that they're all stupid, to make a lot of money off of them.
if we're right.
If I'm right. Yeah.
Okay, so like, for example, the flip side to, God forbid something happens to Elon today. How does the thesis change at that point?
It doesn't change much, because the foundation is there. I think if something were to happen to Elon, I think at the worst case scenario, we would be in a Tim Cook Apple situation. Like, Sundar Pichai and Tim Cook are two of my least favorite Magnificent Seven CEOs. I have a lot of respect for Tim Cook because he is an incredible manager of supply chain.
It's a supply chain
really
god.
Hard. Yes, that is really hard. But that is not a thing that is going to continue to keep Apple relevant in a world of technological progress that's so rapid. And so I think that like has a phase of time where it works. But look at how much, the market cap of Apple has grown, under Tim Cook. So I think that that can be successful for investors for a season. I just wouldn't invest in Apple right now. Like today, I don't own it. I wouldn't buy it today. I would not buy and I would not own Google today. But if something were to happen to him and we got a giant discount on the stock, I would buy it because I think the next phase is where we begin to really rake in money based off of all of the work and innovation that's happened over the last decade. Like that phase of earning off of the foundation that has laid is still ahead of the company. And I have faith in the management and the culture that's there at Tesla to be able to continue that work for at least a while. And then, 5 years later, I would need to re-underwrite and see, okay, is this something that's still going to grow? What is the culture of leadership and management in Tesla at that point in time, and reassess.
I think the interesting analogy there with Apple is that if you look at the Tim Cook era, I believe it's underpinned by Steve Jobs laying out the foundation so that all Tim Cook has to do is just make more iPhones, right? Because if you really think about it, what was in the Apple story by the time Tim Apple took over, is that we had the iPhone, the iPad, and the App Store, and Macs and everything. But really, more iPhones and iPads meant more App Store downloads, which meant a lot more revenue and profit. So it was there. So all Tim Cook really had to do was just more iPhones, and then more apps, more iPhones, right? It was. I mean, listen, I'm not trying to trivialize Tim Cook's job, because it really is insane what he's done with Apple. Truly, I mean, it really truly is. But the analogy there is like they had everything underpinned for all that profit to flow through over the decade or however long it's been since Steve Jobs passed away. So, but in Tesla's case, I still think there is another year or two period, at least, let's say, of where this robotaxi thing and this bot thing has to be created, so that all you need to do is just say more robotaxi, more bot, right? If the ecosystem is built around robotaxi, bot, or whatever, the current fleet, and the equation is just more factories and more units, then at that point I'm like, okay, this is a one-to-one analogy, 100% agreed. But there's still like, I still think it's highly likely that it happens, say something happens to Elon today, because the talent and the culture is there, and a lot of the underpinnings are, I think that all the prototypes are done. It's just, especially when it comes to maybe robotaxi in a way, maybe they have a few more months of development, but it's kind of like switching over from prototype to production. And Tesla has done that multiple times already with multiple cars. They've done it with, which, by the way, this goes under the radar massively with the new Model 3 refresh and the Cybertruck, which came to fruition in its ramp up, in its manufacturing and ramp up stage, while Elon was quote unquote distracted. And those two things are blowing, like they're home runs in the way that they were released, right? So like, I think that gives credence to your point that, hey, the underpinnings are there, but these are new technologies that still have to come to fruition. So that's my only caveat there. Like, once robotaxi and bot are being manufactured, I 100% agree. Like Elon could be like, I'm going to Mars tomorrow, and I'd be like, yeah, cool, go. We just need more bots, more robotaxi. You just keep pumping them out. Go, 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 go. Which I think it's interesting then from that conversational perspective is like, how far away are those two things? Like, they don't seem that far. They don't seem that far. And this is not an attempt to like say, oh, Tesla stock go up. No, I'm like legitimately like from a perspective of prototype to manufacturing and where the software is right now, it doesn't seem that far away. And so the question becomes, how quickly would the market realize this ahead of time, which kind of brings us full circle to your original point. How far ahead is one willing to risk to be ahead of the story so that they can potentially profit on the story. And that's up to the individual to decide. But it's not just a simple math exercise of P&L extrapolate. Goes back to my point, is like, I think most people just don't have the time to be lunatics like we are, that are doing a ton of research on the periphery to try and understand where this story is going.
I would agree with everything that you said. And like, when I think about Steve Jobs versus Tim Cook, like, Steve is obviously, he's a market creator, like just what you would call a rainmaker. Like, we're going to create things that never existed before. We're going to break molds. We're going to lay foundations. And then Tim Cook is an exceptionally skilled optimizer. But an optimizer can only optimize for so long until you need a new foundation for the next phase. And that's what Elon is specifically talking about today in his statements about every 5 years, we need to reorganize the company to lay the foundations for the next phase of growth. And it's, roughly 5-year-ish cycle that Tesla basically redefines the business model and the profit profile of the company. That, the Roadster scale, that's one scale. And then we break out of that, and then we make it to Model S scale. And then eventually we break out of that and we make it to Model 3 scale. And the next phase, like, this is a whole nother scale. And not only are we going to a whole nother scale of vehicle, we're going to a whole nother scale and adding in artificial intelligence software on top of it. So I think that, you have to be able, and I think that's one scale. And then I think that bot coming behind that is like a whole nother scale. And these are like logarithmic improvements over time. It's going from Roadster to S is a 10x increase.
10x every time.
Going from S to 3 is a 10x increase. Going from 3 to the next generation vehicle platform, robotaxi or consumer, whatever you want to call it, that's a 10x. And then layering in software on top of that is 10x. And layering in bots on top of that is another 10x. Like, there's a lot of TAM expansion ahead of the company right now. And it takes someone who has that Steve Jobs like ability to relay a foundation periodically in order to continue to hit those new legs of growth, and not for it to be this run up and then optimize and then completely deplete your future growth prospects and pull revenue into today from tomorrow. At which point then you see the decline.
And it's all built on technology that is game changing by nature, right? That is disruptive by nature. And that's like, it's not a redo or a iteration on existing technology. It's literally like, it's a brand new thing that has never been done before, especially at scale. It's interesting times. It really is interesting times.
I love investing. Like, I freaking love it. It is so fun. Like, think about all of the factors that go into trying, like, our job is to literally predict the future. Get it right, you make money, you lose money. And so we've got great feedback loops that beat us up when we make mistakes. You get incredible rush when you make good calls and have good strategies for taking advantage of those calls. But we've got to understand culture inside of a company. We've got to have some understanding of finances. You've got to understand management. Then you've got to understand technology. Then you've got to understand macroeconomic trends. And, you're recognizing patterns at level after level after level. And to me, it is just like the most fun thing. And I love being a huge nerd and thinking about all of it and making, like talking about my process and my thoughts out loud all along the way, and then I can go back and be like, "You know what? When I said that, I was dumb. When I said that, yeah, there was something there." And just, constantly going through that process over and over and over again, and developing a more robust, more accurate model of the world, like becoming less wrong. Like, we're all wrong. The only question is how wrong. And being an investor in the market allows you to be less wrong over time if you're willing to do the work and willing to learn.
Well, wrong. I think wrong is very much a timeline question too. One can be wrong for a long time until they're not. And again, this is not me saying that this is 100% what's going to happen here, but it is fascinating how, at least with like, my style of investing, it's very much like it sucks for 5 years and it's great for like a year. It sucks for 5 years and it's great for like a year. It's when it's great, like when it sucks, but when it's great is like it's a big win. It's a big win. But I feel like it's impossible to, at least with that style, and this is not an endorsement of it. It very much opens you up to a lot of pain, in a multi-year period, potentially, if you haven't done enough work to make that pain a little bit more subdued, so that you can kind of live through that pain because of the conviction you have in the story. And that's like one of the biggest learning lessons I've had in sort of this sort of decade plus of being in this game, is like every time these periods pass, or I'm in these periods, the most interesting part of it now is, like you said, is like putting this out into the world and allowing the world to give you feedback, and it's fun in a lot of ways, because you learn. You learn, when you're navigating through these periods, you learn a lot of lessons. It's like, okay, so why did I assume this was going to happen at this time? Why didn't I give enough weight to, say, a risk event happening that was outside of my control, so on and so forth. And you start like tweaking, you start tweaking your thesis a little bit as time goes on. But it's all built on a foundation that says, this is going to suck. This is going to suck. It is what it is. And I can't remember the last time, regardless of anything that I've done in my life, where there hasn't been a huge period of suck before I won, in some respect. Career, investing, relationship, whatever. Relationship is really the only outlier, because there hasn't been a freaking second that sucked with my partner, which, I don't know. To this day, I don't know how the frick I pulled that off. But that's my only win. That's my only consistent win. So, but it's just the most interesting part of this whole thing is that this story is related to an individual and a company that just gathers so much attention that by default, anybody who speaks out about it in public, and let's say does a good enough job of laying out how they're thinking about it, it creates an ecosystem around that story. And then you have an individual in a company that's willing for that ecosystem to thrive, and that's what's so interesting about this, both the positives and the negatives. I mean, Tesla's story has a giant supportive group, but then it also has a very unique like group that, I'm sure there's a small percentage of people that are watching this video right now that are watching this just so they can shit on me on something. And okay, great. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think if anything, that's a healthy thing to have, because it makes people accountable when they're trying to formulate a thesis in public, and all of us can learn a little bit.
Well, I mean, one of the takeaways is that, it's going to be painful whether you're right or you're wrong. Like, the presence of pain does not mean that you're wrong, and it doesn't mean that you're right. Like, it's going to suck for a while either way. And so then you have to figure out how to decouple your,
I mean, suck is relative.
Of when you're right and when you're wrong from that feeling of pain and that suck. And so that's where you have to really, try and understand. Like, you've got to do the work to understand. And then, to me, there's a different feeling of I see what I see and I understand what I understand and no one agrees with me, like that feels different to me than I have no idea what's going on and none of the things that I happened or I was expecting are happening.